going on, everybody? My name is Timothy Lamar Cato III, and this is yet another episode of I Got More to Say. And today I am joined, I say a special guest each and every single week, and every single one of my guests are special. But today, we're going to use another word called legendary. Legendary. This man has worked with almost everybody you can think of in the music business, from the 80s to the 90s to even the early 2000s. This man really needs no introduction, and we're going to hear all about him. And this is going to be a phenomenal episode. But I'm joined none other by Mr. Todd Herreman. Todd, how are you doing today?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Nah, no problem at all, Todd. How are you on this 104-degree day?
And the longest day of the year.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. How'd you find that out?
I saw it in the paper.
Oh, okay.
No, it was this morning's headline.
Oh, okay.
LDOTY, longest day of the year.
Longest day of the year?
Yeah.
Okay, so when the sun set, like around 9 o'clock?
I didn't see that part. I stopped reading. I just said longest day of the year. So.
Gotcha. Todd, again, thank you so much for being here. We have a lot to talk about. But I first want to get started about you and your story, your background to what has been this beautiful life that you have led. Talk to me about where you're from, where you grew up, and what got you into music.
Most of my memory from early childhood goes back to Connecticut. Okay. So I have some little memories before that when my parents lived briefly on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. I was born in Schenectady. Side note, you know one of the benefits of being born in Schenectady?
No, sir, but please enlighten me.
I was the only kid in second grade that could spell Schenectady. Okay, so moving right along. Moved to Connecticut when I was probably in kindergarten or nursery school.
Okay.
Finished high school in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I'm the youngest of three, and my family was pretty musical. So my siblings were playing instruments at a young age. My sister was playing piano, and I was very taken with the piano at a young age. So before I started taking lessons, she would do her, couple minutes of practicing a day, and when she was done, I'd get up and try to figure out what she had just played. And so my parents figured they should get me lessons. So I took to that and played piano. How serious can you be at 8 or 9 years old? I guess certain prodigies would say very serious. Mm-hmm. Me, it was really about 7th and 8th grade, where for a lot of reasons, first of all, girls, and the music that was going on at the time. I mean, I grew up with the Beatles and the Stones. Parents, played a lot of big band music. Both of my parents loved classical music. But when I was in 7th grade, I bought a Farfisa organ and got my friends together and formed a band. Okay. And that was, I think, kind of a turning point to me as far as, kind of using this very moderate at the time skill set of playing ability, but to kind of explore and get together and jam with friends. That was pretty cool. We really sucked in 7th and 8th grade, but we started getting serious in high school. Okay. And so I traded in the Farfisa for a big Hammond, and mostly playing, rock stuff. But on the piano side, I was pretty heavily studying classical, and that got pretty serious for me in high school. And so along the way, like in between my junior and senior year in high school, there was an amazing music program for high schoolers at Indiana University, the School of Music, which is a huge music school, one of the top music schools in the country. And I applied for their summer program and got in, and then I decided that that's the school I want to go to. So fast forward, I did an undergraduate program in music and philosophy. I wanted the outside field because of, as Dad used to say, "You sure you want to go into music? What kind of opportunities are?" I will say this, my parents were very, very supportive of me, but also, sat me down and said, eyes wide open, what do you want to do with a music degree? So having grown up in a relatively small town in Connecticut, there were only a couple keyboard players to play in the bands. And so I was kind of the it keyboard player. And then I get to college at a music school at the level of Indiana, and suddenly there are a couple hundred piano players that can play circles around me, jazz or classical or whatever. And so I said, maybe better rethink this. Wanted the degree, to become a better musician, but find some aspect in the music industry that I could use that moderately, trained skill set of playing with my love for music. And along the way, in school, and even when I was, in high school, early synthesizers, analog synthesizers back then, were finding their way into popular music. Keith Emerson, to me was, a prog rock god at the time. The Moog synthesizer was, there were a couple other synthesizer companies, ARP and Buchla, but Moog was it for me. Switched on Bach was a game changer of a record when I was a kid. So I was really into synthesis, and when I was in college, there was just this inkling of a new technology, and this was the digital applications for music production were just starting to emerge. And I started hearing things like sampling and sequencing. MIDI was not yet out when I was in college, but it was coming. So all of a sudden at the end of college, I'm seeing this new technology coming in that I knew was going to change the way records were made, what we're going to hear. So that's where I want to go. So I started contacting these companies, the really kind of esoteric ones that were doing super cutting edge stuff, as well as the big commercial ones, Yamaha, Korg, Roland, Oberheim, Sequential, those companies. And they all told me, go get some sales experience, go to get a music store. And there was a company north of Chicago, a small music store, that was selling the coolest stuff out there. And they had people in the stores that learned this stuff so they could sell it. And I had bought some gear from them, and I asked them for a job. And they gave me a job. So that was kind of my transition out of music school and being a piano player to selling really cool stuff. And I was on commission, so for me, selling $10,000, $20,000 keyboard rigs was a much better business proposition than selling a $6 pack of guitar strings.
Certainly.
So
That
being on
makes sense.
commission.
Yeah.
So fortunately, my bosses were very progressive, and they would carry stuff and make deals with super high-end companies that you wouldn't find at the time at Guitar Center. And I got to sell it. So I kind of became an expert. And MIDI had come out. So all these ancillary products, sequencers, the ability to have instruments talk to each other, and timing, where a drum machine could sync to a sequencer, or you could have your sequencer actually playing drums. Sampling was brand new. So it was a whole new world. And this was, I started doing that in 1983. And MIDI came out right before then, and all these products are coming out. So it was a good time to be selling stuff. Plus I was in Chicago, and it was like the jingle capital of the world, and in the States anyway. And a lot of my clients were some of the top jingle writers. And they had money to spend on gear, and they needed to keep current with the gear to be writing jingles for television. And so anyway, that was kind of my foray into getting my hands on, I don't know if your listeners know what FAO Schwartz is, but it used to be like the premier toy store in the world in New York City. To me, working in this music store was like FAO Schwartz for music tech nerds like me. So that was pretty cool. And one thing I did find, and this is kind of a lesson, you and I have talked a lot about this, is I took that job because I thought I wanted to go work for one of the companies that we were selling their gear. But in selling the gear, I was like, you know what, I really dug having my hands on the equipment. But I started really thinking, you know what, I don't want to be working for a company that's making this gear. I want to be in the studio using this gear. I went back to, I'm really more interested in production.
Because you were a musician at heart.
Well, that too. And just seeing the amazing equipment that was coming out. And I didn't know it was just so going to change the sound of what we were hearing. This is also the very early days of MTV. So the look, the feel, the sound, everything was changing. And one of the big instruments of the time that was so progressive on a number of levels was an Australian computer called the Fairlight. And along the way, my bosses in the small music store in Chicago were able to strike a deal with Fairlight for us to be able to sell Fairlights. It's kind of as like the Midwest rep for Fairlight. And that means it was going to be me. So along the way, I bought a Fairlight and got to know it inside and out. And I sold a bunch of Fairlights. They loved us. And along the way, I got to sell a Fairlight to Prince. And that was a game changer because shortly thereafter, the phone rings at the store and it's for me. And it's people in Prince's camp, I think it was Alan Leeds and Susan Rogers, were asking if I could recommend somebody to help maintain and run the keyboards in the studio and in rehearsals and ultimately on tour for Prince. But the catch was they had to know the Fairlight. And I said, well, that would be me. So I interviewed for the gig and got the gig working for Prince. And so that was kind of the big opportunity where I was in the right place at the right time. So I had that gig from 86 to 87. And so that was through, I went to work for him like the day or the week that the single Kiss was coming out, which I think was the first single for the Parade album. Mm-hmm. And the Parade album had already been done. It was coming out shortly thereafter, which was going to be the soundtrack for the movie Under the Cherry Moon that was coming out in July that summer of 86. Mm-hmm. And they were getting ready to do a tour for the Parade album. So it would be working in the studio with Prince and Susan as the engineer at his house outside of Minneapolis, because Paisley Park was being built at the time, but it was not complete. And then we recorded a lot out at Sunset Sound. And then he was back and forth to Nice in France, where they were finishing the movie, which is where it was filmed. We spent a lot of time in LA. Recording Sunset Sound was his favorite studio out there. And in early 1987, I think February 87, Sign of the Times came out. Mm-hmm. And after a year of working for him almost every day and being on call literally 24/7, as great as that experience was, you had no personal life, but you got to witness some of the most amazing music going down like every single day. And then I decided, I bought the new Fairlight and moved to LA and started my own production company. So that's kind of the arc up until 1987.
You know, Todd, it's just so amazing just to hear you just like name drop Prince and just so candidly speak about it.
Well, you know, let's be clear. It's not like we were like, hey, let's go grab a beer and a sandwich.
No, I understand.
But we can talk a little bit more about that as far as who he was as a person and a musician. But the thing that was so unique about him, and there are many musicians that are so focused and work like crazy, but I think there are probably very few that are as focused and so committed to that craft and artistry. And I've told you the story about his belief that he believes that it's a gift, that the music comes not from him but through him.
He was a vessel for God.
That God hands him this, and it would be a disservice to what he believes. And again, this was 86, 87, so his spiritual belief, I think, developed significantly even after that time, but I think that was the basis for his work ethic, and I would say he probably wouldn't even call it a work ethic. He called it an obligation.
Certainly, Todd. Because I want to talk about, I don't want to get too deep into Prince quite yet. I want to talk about your personal experiences. Mm-hmm. So you were about 25, 26 when you began working with Prince in 85?
If it was 1986, I would have been 27 going on 28.
27 going on 28. So Todd, you stepped away from a position that was, I take it, if you were able to live in Chicago, Chicago's a very major city at that time, and you're selling $10,000, $20,000, midis, keyboards. You were in a fairly, I assume it was a fairly good, position in life as far as just working and being able to make commission off of, like I said, such a high price item. This might be a little bit of a ridiculous question, but, especially with knowing about how, kind of short-sighted or kind of short-lived the music career can be, what made you say, man, I'm gonna go work for Prince and walk away from this?
Well, he was already in the stratosphere. I mean, it was a couple years after Purple Rain. And, there are only a couple artists at that level, really at that level. And, Michael,
Yep.
Madonna.
Yes.
That was the chief rivalry at the time. In term, and Whitney broke right around that time.
87, correct?
Well, Whitney, I Want to Dance with Somebody was blasting on the airwaves right when I took the Prince gig.
Okay.
So she was breaking. But Prince was already there. I mean, Purple Rain put him up at that, as Susan calls it, that cruising altitude. So
it's like a superstardom.
Yeah. The difference from stardom and tons of record sales.
Dirty Mind kind of put him on the map. What was it? 1999 kind of gave him that crossover hit with like Little Red Corvette, and then Purple Rain. Propelled him into superstardom.
In that sequence, when you look at even the earlier stuff, For You, Prince was still late teens when he got his record deal. So here in '84, and the success of Purple Rain, he would have been 25, 26, and at the superstar status. So, but back to your question, why would I leave that for? Even worst case scenario, had Prince's trajectory not continued, you'd still be at that, at that level. And what an opportunity, what an experience to see how he is an artist, how the industry works, how a tour works, how the studio works. That was really, you only get one chance at something like that. That I was certain of. So there wasn't a whole lot of time needed for me to make that decision. And having said going back to what I said earlier, I had already decided that I didn't want to pursue the path of selling gear to get to work for a company that was making that gear. So when something like this falls in your lap, when you've already decided that, I'm not going to go over here, I want to go over here, that's kind of like somebody giving you the keys to, the what would you call it? Keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, your wildest dreams.
And again, I was still pretty young, so I said, take it.
So, Todd, because I want to make sure I paint this picture. So, when you originally got hired to work with Prince, you said it was after the Parade album had already released.
It was, the Parade album hadn't yet come out. The Kiss single comes out before the record.
Yes.
Before the album comes out. That's how they did it back then, anyway.
Okay.
And so the single's kind of the lead off to the album release.
Okay.
So the album was already pretty much done. There were still some parts that were like a 12-inch for Mountains that was going to be the end credits of the movie. I didn't do the original recording for Mountains, but one of my first sessions with Prince was him doing the extended mix for the closing credits. And that was, I think, my first session. I'd have to go back and look at my notes for that, but that was my first time in the room where Prince is like, roll tape and he's playing the drums. Give me the bass, playing the bass, put up this instrument, give me the guitar, where he is just doing this to extend that from 4 to 12 minutes. And I had no idea that, we've heard stories, but I had no idea that this is what he was capable of. Certainly. And I learned that like first day on the job, and it was like, oh my God, put on your seatbelt. Like every day, put on your seatbelt. But that was a big eye-opener for me, because I really had no idea.
Certainly. Todd, so you're 25, 26 years old when you first get the gig with Prince. what is it? This is your first ever opportunity too within the music bit, within like the actual business side of it. So you were walking into, now a lot of people hear, oh, Prince, Purple Rain had came out. They're thinking things are just, peaches and cream and just, this is about to be an easy road. However, before the Sign of the Times, the album that you worked on, before you worked on that album, Prince was at a little bit of, there was some like kind of things going on within his life. I mean, he had Cherry Blossom was a major flop in theaters. Parade was, I feel like, an overall well-received album, but the one that came before that,
Around the World in a Day.
Around the World in a Day.
It did well.
It did well, but I think critically, from what I've read, it was mixed reviews. And Prince, I believe, was in the process of breaking up, like with one of his.
That happened actually during that year.
I'm sorry, Todd. With all that, just painting that picture, did you feel any pressure going into this position because you're working with the superstar artist, and a year and a half before you guys, before you were hired, there's kind of, I don't want to say turmoil, but it's not necessarily it's not necessarily the easiest situation. You're walking into a lot of different moving parts, some good, some bad.
Well, let me just kind of add a little of not only my experience to that walking into it, but looking back at it now, looking at the timeline, what happened shortly before I got there. I think, from my understanding, from Purple Rain, things were great. There was a lot of money. The band was really tight. Around the World in a Day did well. Parade album, I think, leading up to that, things were probably pretty good. Okay. But I think at some point, when you take a look at, the band members, there was a little bit of an age difference, but not much. Wendy was probably the youngest one. But I think at some point, Prince was so focused and constantly creating. And I think at some point for an artist, it's hard for somebody to kind of keep doing the same thing under the same constraints. And I mean that with all due respect. The band wasn't a constraint, but in one way it kind of was. It's like you've got your toolbox. The band is part of your toolbox. And I'm starting to expand, this way, but the toolbox isn't, and they were all outstanding musicians. But I think that tension was starting, and it's been suggested, and I think it's probably accurate, that maybe because of some of the band members' contributions, probably mostly Wendy and Lisa, that their contributions, they may have thought that maybe they were underappreciated, underrecognized, perhaps underpaid. Not sure, but I think they were very strong individuals, and very talented, and certainly contributed a great deal. And I think something had to give. And so the Parade album came out. The tour that they were rehearsing for, that was going to be a big tour, kind of got canceled because of tensions in the Middle East, and the State Department asked U.S. acts not to tour Europe for fear of them being terrorist targets. So they canceled the tour, eventually ended up doing a shorter tour starting in London, then Europe, and ending up in Japan. But yeah, there were definitely some tensions there. At the same time, the movie had come out that July and flopped, like immediately flopped. That was, Prince had worked on that. That was his baby, and he took that really hard. I think that was a game changer. He was engaged to Susanna, and that was unraveling. So, and again, think of Prince being, that was 86. He would have been 28 years old. His birthday was just last week, by the way, June 7th. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, especially at his age. He was 25 around this time, 26.
Well, 25? Yeah, 28.
Yeah, 28, excuse me. Yeah, so he wasn't even 30 yet.
So that's a lot of pressure. Plus, he had this huge organization. You know, there are a lot of mouths to feed. You know, literally. And so I think he just got to the change that, you know, he needed to move on to something else, and it didn't include the revolution.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there are a lot of factors there to answer your question.
Certainly.
And they all kind of simmered up to a boil at about the same time. So not that him diving into recording was so new, but he did. You know, when the tour got canceled, we went out to LA. We were there for a couple months. And we were just recording every day. And, you know, there were times where he would do 2, 3, 4 songs in a day. You know, so again, we talk about the vault. When he passed, people were like, 8,000 songs, they're speculating. I mean, we were speculating back then in the vault that there may be upwards of 3,000 finished songs.
Yeah.
That most people have never heard and maybe never will.
Certainly.
So, but you add, that was, you know, when Sign of Times came out, 1987, you fast forward to when he passed away, almost 30 years later of recording every day, there's going to be a lot of material there.
Yeah.
A lot of material. But he certainly dove in. I think part of it was to distract himself from, you know, what was going on around him in his life. Just how do you do that? You dive into your work for some people.
Certainly.
And that, of course, affected us because we're there around the clock while he's doing that.
And you were walking into these situations. What was it like for you, and like, where did your sense of poise and focus come from to be able to, you know, successfully carry it out? Your position?
Well, I learned pretty quickly that my job there was to anticipate his needs and do whatever I could to anticipate them. And, you know,
Super
and I think
difficult
for
to do,
anybody in the
probably, huh?
studio, even if it's a runner or an assistant engineer, your job is to assist and, you know, generally not speak unless you're spoken to. Don't get in the way. You know, there might be times where, you know, that guard is down and it's okay. But generally, it's like your job is to allow him to work as freely, as creatively, and as quickly as he can. And that's really fast because he worked that way. Again, going back to your comment about him playing so many instruments, that facilitated recording going like this because he didn't have to wait to describe what he wanted somebody else to play. He would just play it.
He knew what he wanted and he recorded it.
So, you know, and oftentimes, if I can just riff off that for a minute, you know, we might go into the studio at his house after rehearsals, you know, start recording at 8 o'clock, and he'd finish the song at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And you think, okay, I can go home and get a couple hours of sleep before rehearsal starts next morning. And then he says, fresh tape.
Oh.
Means, you know, grab the coffee because you're going to do another song. And a couple times, this would go on for days.
Oh, that's actually a question I have for you. Is that fresh tape? Does that still kind of haunt you?
No, we laugh about it now. But we all knew it, you know. But usually, I mean, say oftentimes it was only Prince, Susan Rogers, and me in the studio. Sometimes there might be somebody else, depending on, you know, Eric Leeds might have been called in to play sax or flute. But yeah, you think you might be winding down, and then you hear, because he had kind of a nasally voice, and you just hear fresh tape, because we were tape-based back then, just to clarify then. He had at that point, a 2-inch Studer machine, and yep, fresh tape. So, you know, yeah, put on the coffee because you're going to be here for a while.
I remember you told me my first initial conversation with you when I applied to Syracuse, and we had when I was applying to Syracuse, we had a conversation. You said that he was responsible for your hair turning gray.
I stand by it. I do. Actually, it's probably more genetic, but you know, when you're 28 and you're not sleeping for days at a time. No, but I mean, again, going back to your earlier question about why would I leave one gig for a gig like this, and you know, looking back at it, it was a long time ago. You know, it was a life-changing opportunity, and I don't regret that for a second. But yeah, I do joke about the gray hair started back then.
Certainly. So. To talk about Prince really fast, Todd, this is something that Dr. Susan Rogers mentioned in her her interview at Sunset Sound, and she said that Prince made some of the songs off of, I think, like 1999 and even Purple Rain. He made them in his bedroom in Minnesota, where he's from, on, in his bedroom on like an analog tape. And she was saying about how a lot of, young people today be like, oh, well, we make music right now from our bedrooms all the time. Can you talk about how amazing it was for Prince to be able to make that quality of music in his bedroom back in sometime in the 70s?
Sure. Well, it was a lot different back then. So let's look at more, late 70s, early 80s. By the time of, he had his record deal, and so things like 1999 would have been a little bit more upscale than the bedroom scenario, and then certainly Purple Rain was done. Much of it was done at Sunset Sound. So then you're talking about, yes, full console, top level mics, 2-inch tape. But just to let me go back to the question more about, of course we can make records in our dorm room now versus back then. We have tools at our disposal today, like my laptop sitting over there, that I have Pro Tools and a million plugins in there. We didn't have that back then, and certainly, if you're looking at the access that he had to studios and eventually his own at Paisley Park in the mid 80s, late 80s, and those full-blown studios, of course, a lot of that I can do, on a laptop. You still need a good sounding room. You still need good sounding mics. But going back to his earlier stuff that was much before my time there, that he would record at his house in outside of Minneapolis, that was kind of a bare bones thing. But you also listen to his early recordings, and I think a lot of it speaks to the energy and the rawness of the songs itself. And that kind of limited kind of studio scenario, I think, kind of speaks to and actually became part of the recording, And as he progressed and, had his own studio, and at some point had other people working with him more so than he did, even when I was there. His productions got more polished as time went on. But I think, his probably perception of the studio itself as a tool was quite different than it was back in the 80s. So one other thing I wanted to mention, because you and I talked about this a bit, I think Prince was unique in that the way he worked, as writing, playing, recording, that he worked so fast. And the ideas just wouldn't shut off, not only from track to track, but from song to song. Most artists, when they go into record, have a relationship with the producer who helps bring out the talents of the artist, shines lights on, the gem that this artist might have, certain things even about the structure of a song or a lyric, looking for the right songs, being that kind of go-between. On the creative side, business part being something totally different, but on the creative side, having that producer another set of eyes and ears in the room to guide and coach the artist. Prince didn't do that. Prince didn't have a producer. He was the producer. And I'm certain that the reason for that was that he worked so fast and knew exactly what he wanted. A producer would have just gotten in the way, like literally stifled that process for him. And I think that's really rare, like really rare. Frank Zappa was one kind of with that hyper creativity where he could record 24 hours a day with no distraction or, nothing getting out of the way between him and, getting it to tape or whatever the platform was at the time. And just again, to sideline on that, and Susan Rogers talks about, and I think she's just absolutely spot on, that Prince, and she would know this through 4 albums, from Purple Rain, Around the World in a Day, Parade, and Sign of the Times, that he always did his vocals alone. And she characterizes that he didn't want anything, including an engineer, between him and his listener, to the audience. So it would be the microphone straight to tape. So we could hear him like on the other side of the door, and if he needed something, he'd call, but he would kick us out when he's doing vocals, and I think that's the reason why.
Yeah. Todd, let me ask you this, because you mentioned this before on one of our previous conversations. So you stated that Prince didn't need a producer. However, Prince didn't necessarily do too well producing for others, but he could write for other people. He could write songs for other people. He could lead a band, but he couldn't produce for others, and he also couldn't. There was something else that Dr. Rogers said. Oh, Prince cannot pick radio hits. He did not do a very good job at that. Why couldn't Prince necessarily produce for other people? And what was kind of like his struggle as far as for picking like his singles?
Yeah, and that's the other part about the songs he wrote for other people. Let's take all three of those.
Okay.
So the first part that I had commented on, and this is related to him not having a producer for himself, and I think the reasons for that is what I just explained, that producer would only get in the way. But I think, in the words of Phil Ramone about what I think is the producer's role is bringing out the uniqueness of the artist, pulling that out, shining a light on those unique things. It could be from the performance, it could be from the musicians hired to, the side musicians, from the songs, and so translate that into the acts that Prince produced, Vanity 6, Apollonia, The Time, all those acts, they were all Prince records with somebody else singing.
Didn't he write for, was it Sinead O'Connor?
Sinead O'Connor.
Yeah.
Well, he had written the song. I don't think it was originally written for her.
Okay.
But it became her, just a monster hit was Nothing Compares to You.
Nothing Compares to You, yes.
Yeah. So, there's so many huge songs.
That he wrote for other people.
Yeah. Shaka Khan, I Feel For You. What a great cut. But he recorded it. It was his own cut. Manic Monday for the Bangles. There's just a string of hits. And most of that came about by having a song in the vault. He's recording every day. And all of a sudden, this girl group called the Bangles come, well, give him Manic Monday. So he had this vault, in the case of Shaka Khan, he recorded the song, but she did it and certainly kind of made it her own.
Certainly.
But that wasn't a Prince record that she sang on. It was, it was a cover, at that point. So he certainly had a wealth of material that he could hand out, to people. And so what was the other question?
Yeah, so Prince didn't need a producer, but why couldn't Prince produce for other people? Or why did he struggle with that? And then why did he struggle?
I don't know that he struggled with it. I think it was really more maybe part of his business model is that he had this stable of artists and he's recording and writing all the time, and he could feed these to people in this larger stable of artists. But basically they all sounded like Prince records because they were.
Certainly.
If he played all the parts and then here you sing on it, there were a couple, cases where that wasn't it. But basically, even if we go to, we listen to the spin-offs that came out of Purple Rain and the Time, there were certain things that, in the Time kind of, because of the musicians in the Time, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis came out at the time, went on to have one of the biggest producing careers on the planet. Look at what they did with Janet Jackson. It came out at the time, so that was the Minneapolis camp. But you listen to the early Janet records, and it was totally the Minneapolis sound that was based on Prince.
Certainly.
Jesse Johnson, formidable player in his own right, and he helped Susan when she first started engineering for him to explain to her and get her familiar with how Prince gets that sound that he's so well known for. because Jesse had been with him for years.
Certainly.
So I think there's a lot of spillover from those other acts that were all coming out of Minneapolis, but most of them were Prince entities.
I know you mentioned that Prince was, a consummate worker, never got any sleep or allowed others to get any sleep. The music just flowed through him from a higher power. What was like his personality, his temperament like in the studio? What was it like working with somebody that hyper-focused and that talented?
Well, it varied, but I'd say 90% of the time, it was like, I know Susan was asked this question in an interview. You get the call that Prince wants you to come to the studio, and that was pretty much daily. What does he tell you ahead of time? Have this set up, have this set up. It's like, it doesn't say anything, just have everything set up so that he can walk in and go do, if he wants to sit down and start playing drums, have the bass tuned, you can hand him the bass, have a couple keyboards set up, make sure that, he had the old Linn drum machine, the LM1, the first Linn drum machine, that he loved it, and he used it for years, including on Sign of the Times. But I mean, probably used it on 5 records. And he had the way that would go into the console. He had actually Roland guitar pedals, and he'd have certain outputs of the Linn drum going into the guitar pedals that would go into the console that would be, patched to tape. So he could walk in, just throw down a Linn pattern and, roll tape and just have the pattern recorded, the individual Linn parts on individual tracks, and then he'd say, give me the bass, or go out and play the piano, the Steinway B in Studio 3 at Sunset. So everything was set up, mics, the piano was set up, the drum kit was set up, everything was patched and ready to go. So you could pretty much just, unmute the channel and hit record if he said, I want to play drums. So that was it. And most of that was, at Susan, because she was the engineer. There might be something like roll the Fairlight into the control room because he wants to start with that.
Sure.
So, but other than that, it was generally just make sure everything was ready to go. So, and I wanted to make the point that, so most acts, if they have, let's say they're signed to a record deal, let's say it's a band, they just came off tour, maybe they ride on the tour bus, okay, we're off tour, we have to start thinking about the next record. We're gonna have writing sessions, we're gonna jam, we're gonna come up with songs. And over the course of, 6, 8, 9 months, we've got 20 songs we're ready to record. Maybe record companies approved them. We're gonna go in and record all of them. We pick 12 or 14 that go on the album. But that's a process that you do the writing and the rehearsing in advance, then you go into the studio. That never happened with Prince. He is writing every single day. So sometimes he would literally show up at the recording studio with a legal notepad with scribbles on it, with lyric ideas. And then, there are stories about, well, he had a bed set up in the studio, in Studio 3. Well, he did. Sometimes he would just go lie down on the bed and scribble lyrics. And that's the way he worked. One time when we were out at Sunset Sound, I was creating some sounds on the Fairlight, and so sometimes he would come in and, he didn't ask me to come up with a particular sound, but I would just say, check this out. And one time I had something up on the Fairlight when he walked into the studio at Sunset Sound, and it was in the late afternoon, and he hit a couple things that I had up on the keyboard, and one thing he just locked in on, and he said, Gilbert, cancel dinner plans. And he wrote Housequake, like that.
Wow.
He didn't even come in with an idea for Housequake.
That's the second song on A Sign of the Times, correct?
Might have been the first.
Oh, okay.
It
know
might
better
be
than me.
I think it's the first cut on side 1.
Certainly.
Unless it was Sign of the Times. I think that was a separate side. So, but yeah, Housequake. The idea was just triggered to him because of a sound that I had called up, and just like this, Housequake went down and like super fast, and most of that was Fairlight. Sign of the Times. It was, talk about a prophetic lyric in summer of '86. Listen to the lyrics. In France, a skinny man died of a small disease, of a big disease with a little name. It was AIDS. The AIDS epidemic was exploding in 1986.
Yeah. He talked a lot about crack. The crack epidemic.
Yeah. He said, at home, 17-year-old boy's idea of fun is being high on crack, toting a machine gun.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a gun problem in this country. Here we have Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson launching, rockets, and Elon Musk. The space shuttle had exploded, the year before, and he talks about it. A rocket ship explodes, people still want to fly. So you listen to that lyric today, after we just came through a pandemic. That's what he's talking about in 1986, about gun violence. That's what he's talking about in 1986. But he would walk in with his legal pad, and with that one, he just started with a drum groove and a synth bass on the Fairlight, and he does his vocal. The guitar is kind of mirroring the vocal, but where does this stuff come from? I mean, it's extraordinary. He'd just walk in the door, and either he'd hear something on the Fairlight, or he'd come in with an idea and just start playing, and a couple hours later, the song is done. And that ended up being the title cut on the record.
Sure. Yeah. Todd, with Prince, because we oftentimes hear about what he was able to do as far as his own solo artist, what he was able to do for his band, how he wrote for others, but he didn't necessarily do too many features. I remember Dr. Susan Rogers, that is. She mentioned how Michael Jackson reached out to him to be on Bad, and he just was like, nah, I'm good. I don't want to do it. He never ever did any much collaborative music with the other giants, such as I don't think he ever did anything with Madonna during the '80s. And I remember Dr. Rogers spoke. She was like, Prince understood not to go, into other superstars' territories. Like he didn't want to do
on your rival's turf.
On your rival's turf.
She said,
yeah, that's what I meant to say. Todd, you have your own story regarding We Are the World. Can you talk about that? And can you explain why Prince didn't necessarily, I don't want to say not play too nice, but why he just didn't really work with others?
I don't really know, but I think some of the speculation is probably true. So there was the thing with Bad, and they were talking. I answered the phone once when Prince was doing vocals, and it was Michael. I don't know what they were going to talk about, but here you have two of the biggest stars on the planet. Michael might have had a bigger following at the time. I think he probably did. But I think Prince decided, no, I'm not going to do that. So Bad and We Are the World. So there was, I think, hope and expectation that Prince would show up to We Are the World, especially given the cause. But it was, in part, Michael's project. It was Michael's baby. Michael and Lionel Richie wrote it. And Prince wanted control. And I think how much of it was ego versus how much was it from possibly dividing your base? I don't really know, but I think those two, the Bad and We Are the World, between Prince and Michael, are probably closely connected. And I think Susan's comment was something like, you don't want to do battle with your rival on your rival's turf. So maybe, I don't know. I really don't know. And Prince, I mean, there are millions of stories, not only music related, but just personality related. Yeah. I mean, you've probably heard many of them where, Prince was going to show up at a club to play, and it's getting to 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and Prince either shows up or he doesn't, Jimmy Fallon tells a story about getting to play ping pong with Prince. I can tell you some ping pong stories because Prince and I used to play ping pong. We were pretty evenly matched. We played a different game, but we played a lot of ping pong. So Prince liked to play ping pong. And there was a club called Spin. I think the actress Susan Sarandon started a ping pong club called Spin. And Jimmy Fallon, Prince, or Prince's people had been talking about, getting them together and, maybe getting to play ping pong at Spin. And so it finally happened. And, but same kind of thing where Prince's people would call and Jimmy's at the ping pong place, like Prince is outside in the limo, and, kind of thing. And he would pick and choose, but it's Prince. And this time, Jimmy Fallon told the story after Prince passed, and it was pretty amusing. He was trying to, make light of some of his experiences. And that they played ping pong, and the Prince's final shot, which he won the game on, was one of those shots where it just nicks the edge of the table and then rolls on the floor. And then Jimmy Fallon, bends over to, get on his knees to pick up the ball. He gets up and Prince is gone, just poof.
Disappeared.
So, I mean, that's Prince.
That just was him. Where does that closed offness comes from? Because even Dr. Rogers mentioned this. She says, or where do you feel like it may have come from? Because she mentioned like how, there will be, she didn't name names, but she said that there was a fellow superstar artist that Prince
I don't know if it was an artist or a producer, but Prince kind of blew him off in the studio.
Didn't really talk to him. And he was just so closed off. That
probably happened more than once.
Yeah.
Again, he was still young, not that is an excuse for certain kinds of behavior, but
she described him as like bratty.
He could be bratty, yeah. A lot of times I think it was like, not now, I'm working, but I think there were times where he was less than cordial. And what was it? He was having a bad day or not now? I don't know.
Yeah. It just was him.
Yeah. There were a couple times where I think he was maybe frustrated. I saw him throw a drumstick once, but he was under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I think daily.
25.
Not only to, match what he had done in the past, but continue. He had this huge organization and, certain things like a movie going south. I think there are a lot of issues that, not everybody's a prince every day. And I mean that in the literal sense, not the, him in his name. I saw him do some, beautiful things for people. He was
very charitable of her.
And he never. I mean, there are stories of him donating large chunks of money to great causes, and he never asked for any recognition. He kept it quiet. It's just, it was important to him, near and dear to his heart. But, to Susan's point, he could be a brat.
Yeah.
I felt I almost lost my job one day, actually 2 nights in a row, where a synthesizer went down during the live performance. During Matt Fink's solo in Head. These are like Oberheim analog synthesizers that they weren't the most stable beasts on the planet, back then. And they actually were pretty reliable during my time. But, one of them crashed during a critical point during a show. I think it was at Cobo Hall in Detroit on Prince's birthday in, it would have been June 7th, 1986. And the synth went down when Matt was playing a solo on it. I'm like, and so I remember Alan Leeds came over to me at the after party that was Prince's birthday party, huge party. And he just said, Prince wanted to know what happened. The synth died, I had replacements. So I put the spare up the next day and the spare died at the same time in the next show. Oh, now it looks like I screwed up.
I know,
right?
You was like, kicking and screaming.
Seriously screwed up. Like, you knew it was dead, and how could it be? I mean, somebody was after me. It was a mob hit, So now I have 2 synths out for repair. We had one more spare, and Sheila had it in L.A. And it FedEx it to me. And I think the next show was Madison Square Garden. I'm not sure. I don't remember the timeline. And we were about to go to Europe. And during the solo, so crew, has to be on a side wing. So we're watching during the show in case anything happens. We have to jump on it. During Matt's solo, it was the song Head, Prince came over and I'm sitting in the wing on stage right, and Prince is just looking at me during the solo, and it didn't die. So, as Susan's language, I live to record another day. I live to do another show. But, how do you explain that to your boss when they're playing in front of 20,000 people on his birthday, no less? So, but that's
Detroit and MSG, two very big musical cities.
Yeah. So I was okay in Detroit, but I think it was, I was okay at the Garden, but I think it was Detroit and then maybe Lexington, Kentucky, something like that, where two different synths, what are the odds, would crap out during the same song, a night apart. So, but I don't think that was unreasonable for, him to be upset or for me to be called into question on it, Could I say it wasn't my fault? No, it wasn't, but it's still my responsibility.
Certainly.
Right? So, but anyway, there were a couple times where I saw Prince like totally let his guard down and say something that, because if he's so focused and just working so hard all the time, you don't really get to see, who are you, other than that. Yeah. So that's who we knew him to be. But there were a couple times where I saw the inside of this soul, revealed in such a way that was really prophetic. And the one that we've talked about, which is probably my most often told Prince story, but for good reason, was that one night, it was a Friday after rehearsals, at the warehouse, the band was rehearsing because we're still getting ready to go on tour. Susan says, Todd, bring this gear over to the house. Prince wants to record. And when we got to his house, he was in his living room playing. He had a purple Yamaha Grand in his, which I think is at Paisley Park now. He was just playing, kind of jazzy, improvising, just noodling. And so Susan was kind of frantically setting up mics on the piano, because that one we didn't keep regularly mic'd up, and running cables down the stairs to the control room, which had an API hand-built Dimidio console that mirrored the one that was in Studio 3 at Sunset Sound. Nice studio. And so he's like, Susan, roll tape. So, you just hit go and you dial things up as fast as you can, and Susan was really good at it. So he was just kind of playing for 6 or 7 minutes, piano. He runs downstairs, sits behind the drum kit, roll back to the top, and he plays drums over that piano part. It's like, Todd, give me the bass. He had an Alembic bass at his house that, I always had to have tuned up and have fresh strings on it. So he plays bass over those tracks, and give me the guitar. He put up probably a Yamaha DX7, put a couple keyboard parts on it, probably some Fairlight stuff on there. Call Eric. And so he had Eric come in and blow some sax parts on it. So at this point, it's probably around midnight. And you think, okay, just a kind of jazzy instrumental piece. I'm not sure where this is going to go, maybe to the vault. Fresh tape. Does another jazzy instrumental tape. 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Fresh tape. This went on until Monday. So that's the gray hair part, right? Sorry. So we were recording 3 days straight, no sleep. And he came up with the kind of a narrative for these 8 instrumental jazzy tracks, that it's a band out of Pittsburgh called Madhouse. And the title for each of these 8 instrumentals would be the number in the order that it was recorded. So it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then, so Warner put it out under the fictitious name Madhouse. The album was called 8. So number 8, and Prince would be kind of rough mixing it on the fly, bouncing it to stereo 2-track. And so number 8 was mixed and bounced to 2-track. We're beat because it's 3 days no sleep. The sun's coming up. The number 8 kind of faded into this wash of reverb with an ethereal synth pad. It was a Prophet VS synth, and just very hypnotic. And so then the music stopped, and the tape is slapping against the reel, then dead silence. And it was just Prince, Eric, and me in the control room. Susan was out labeling tape boxes. Dead silence, and I couldn't take it. I just finally looked at Prince and said, "How can you sleep at night knowing you can do shit like that?" And it was, I felt comfortable enough in my job, and I think we just had a 3-day marathon. It was a valid question, okay? And this was one of those moments where Prince just looked at me and said, "That's the problem, Todd. I can't sleep at night. God hands me a groove, and I can't throw it away." And I was just like, oh. In one sentence, that explained everything I needed to know about Prince. God hands me a groove, and I can't throw it away. And to this day, I will never, ever forget it, because that explained his belief about his place in the world, in the universe, and his musicianship, that it's a gift given to him. Yeah. And if he ignores it, he's doing a disservice to whatever you call that higher power. So I thought that was just really powerful, that he's acknowledging that he believes that the music comes through him, not from him.
Certainly.
So
I could definitely believe him on that one.
Yeah.
38 albums later, and 8,000 songs sitting in a vault.
Right.
Yeah, behind that.
So, but one of the reasons I tell that story is it tells a side of Prince that I'm just glad at one point during that time with him that I got to experience that from him. There were a couple other times where, you would see a side of him that was very rare, but it kind of spoke to who he was. He had a great sense of humor.
Yeah, I've seen the Jay Leno clips.
It didn't come out very often, but when it did, you tell he's capable of it. He just hides it a lot because he's focused on something else. But I shown you that or sent you that Leno clip, and he's talking about joking on his bandmates and stuff. There's some funny stuff in there.
No,
and he would do stuff like that, on occasion. He would just kind of let his hair down and just but he wouldn't do too much of that because it got in the way of what
working. Todd, what was the most extraordinary thing you ever seen him do?
Well, that's hard to say because almost every session was just like, I can't believe I just saw that. One of my regrets for that time is not keeping a diary where I could come home even if it was at 4 o'clock in the morning and said, this is what Prince did. I so regret that. And even like Susan, a bunch of us will talk about that because he did that every day, at some point, the extraordinary becomes the norm, and it all kind of blurs together. And I just wish I had written more of that down. But there's so many times, Cato, that like every day, like hearing those Soul Preacher screams, going back to hearing when he was cutting the vocal for Sign of the Times. One of my favorite Prince songs is The Beautiful Ones. Where he's lying on the floor in First Avenue, screaming, "Do you want him? Do you want me? I gotta know." Absolutely riveting performance. And, I heard a handful of those go into tape. And Susan calls them his preacher screams. And where does that come from? I mean, that's pretty deep inside. And so, he just kind of walks, when he's done with his vocal out, and then you go and hear that, you're just like, what? I think, though, and I already told the story, one of the first sessions that I remember is doing the extended mix for Mountains, when I saw him jump from drums to bass to guitar, to vocals like that. And seeing that for the first time, that was unforgettable. But I think it is amazing where every session. Let me just. I can remember a couple sessions where there was a song that he was working on that I'm just like, no, this ain't it. You know, there were a couple, and out of 8,000 songs, of course, there might be a couple clunkers.
For sure, yeah.
But there were so many that, again, never saw the light of day that you just wonder, people should hear this.
Do you believe that Prince's best song is probably stored away in that vault?
We don't know, you know, and your idea of his best song and my idea might be, I mean, we were just talking about,
things,
you know,
yeah.
well, you know, if you had to pick one. Let's just say there's stuff there that will still blow your hair back, you know, that we haven't heard.
And so much time has passed probably between, you know, just his career, his life and everything. Like, we probably really won't be able to truly judge or gauge, really.
I hope, and I think so far, the estate has done a good job in curating the additional releases.
I have 2 of them.
I thought the Sign of the Times deluxe box set with like 45 additional songs was really well curated. And I went back and listened to that and goes, God, I'd forgotten about this. Yeah. Now I remember it, but I'd forgotten about this. And there's so much more that even in that time frame didn't get released. But I think they did a good job. I mean, it came with a glossy 120-page book that was really beautifully done. So, you know, side note, I just wonder, well, what would Prince think? And I think he alluded to something, you know, years before he died, when he was asked about, what are you going to do with all this stuff, you know? And he said, we'll let somebody else decide. So that's what they're doing. You know, otherwise, I think it would be a disservice to his memory, to his artistry, to not do something with it.
Certainly.
But do it respectfully, thoughtfully, and very carefully. And from what I've seen so far, I have the Purple Rain release of the show at Syracuse, at the Dome. And they remastered the recording of the live show, not the record, but the show itself. And I think they did a good job on that. They, not too long ago, released Diamonds and Pearls. And I think, what was that, 93-ish? I didn't work, I had nothing to do with that. I was, you know, long moved on at that point. But I thought that was a great record. I mean, the singles that came off of that, Diamonds and Pearls, I mean, what an incredible song by itself. Listen to the arrangement, how the bass line works against the keyboard parts. It's strange, and it's perfect, you know? But I think they did a good job curating that new box set of, you know, things that were done a lot around that time frame that had not been previously released. So I think they're doing a good job. I hope that continues. I think they probably have a pretty good team on it.
Certainly. I would agree.
So
I have piano and a microphone.
Yeah.
And then that came out on vinyl after he passed. And then
I remember when that came out.
I also have there's another record. It has a photo of him. I think he's wearing a jean jacket and like a red bandana. It has Prince like spray painted on the wall behind him, and it's just called Prince. So I have both of those.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay, I'll have to see if I can find it. I'll have to show it to you.
I'll look that one up. And I'm sure that there will be more. And, you know, I'm curious on the Michael Jackson side too. I mean, a lot of the records that he came out with later, they had recorded for years, you know, before his next record came out. So I had heard that on the Dangerous album, which I worked on only briefly, and none of the stuff I worked on made it on the album, but that they had like upwards of 150 songs, you know, in the cans for that. So where are those?
Certainly.
You know, so I mean that's a treasure chest, I'm sure.
Yeah. Todd, a couple quick questions to kind of wrap up, like your experiences with Prince. I wanted to. This is something that I feel like this may come off, and I don't mean this with any disrespect intended, but was Prince too talented for the average person to really appreciate? And the reason why I asked is because Dr. Susan Rogers she told a story, and she said that one day Prince was reading some article from like a big publication, and they called him like the diminutive singer,
Right.
And then it was talking about his guitar playing, or I believe it was his guitar playing, and then he was like, or his piano playing, and he was like, man,
Yeah, they weren't talking about his guitar
they weren't
playing,
talking
and
about
his
his guitar
comment was,
playing.
why don't they talk about
Why don't they talk about my guitar playing?
Yeah, something to that effect.
Yeah.
Well,
Was he too talented? Because if I could take it a step further, Michael Jackson is Michael Jackson. He's, the star of the 80s, as a lot of people would consider him. But just even hearing you talk about just how amazing Prince was, the way he worked, how he knew what he wanted and he could do it all himself, I still feel like he's criminally underappreciated.
I think as time goes on, more and more of those stories come out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think certainly more so than even when I was there, but I know that because of the transition from the Revolution to what ultimately became Sign of the Times, and then subsequent records, that more and more of that story that he was playing everything, and even a lot of the earlier stuff, he was playing everything. And I think that word got out a little bit more, certainly reinforced by projects like Madhouse, where he did everything other than Eric coming into play. So, was he too talented? I think he was just one of those so extraordinarily gifted, and also interestingly, completely self-taught. Didn't read music, and sometimes, serious musicians will criticize, well, so-and-so can't read music. Well, so what? That might have held him back, So if your ear and your understanding of how you can make parts work, and again, Susan once said about that particular song, Sign of the Times, that Prince had, to quote her, a watchmaker's knack of being able to make all these parts work for the song, but with the fewest possible parts. But he's playing all of it. I mean, look at when Doves Cry. So you have this massive hit. I think it was the first #1 hit that didn't have a bass line in it. That was his conscious choice because it served the song. He was a master at that kind of stuff. So I think there are very few that had such a broad, capable skill set. But I think it served him, So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think that he was just one of those, super unique talents from writing, performing, playing, that just allowed him to do all that. So, there's some incredibly talented and multi-talented people out there, but I don't think we'll ever see another Prince.
I fully agree. I mean, I wasn't, unfortunately, I think I didn't really start to, actually, I'll tell you a funny story, actually. When Prince really became one of my favorite artists was in February 2007. My favorite NFL team is the Indianapolis Colts. And just in case, I don't necessarily know if you remember, but they played in the Super Bowl that year. We have finally got past Tom Brady.
It's still considered one of the best Super Bowl
performances.
halftimes. Yeah.
So I remember being a kid, and my mom, I wish she would have let me slide. My favorite team was playing, and we were getting ready to win the Super Bowl. We haven't won since. But anyways, I remember, she let me watch like the halftime show, and it was in Miami, so the stadium is open, and next thing you know, it starts raining.
Yeah.
And then he starts playing Purple Rain, and it got like I remember I thought it was so cool how he was playing the guitar, and then this guitar is like in the shape of like his stylized P.
The symbol.
Yeah, the symbol. Thank you.
Yeah.
And his shadow came up, and he was playing, and that's really when I would tell people all the time. People would ask me like, who are some of your favorite artists? I would say Prince, and I couldn't tell you a song from him until I got to be about probably like 10 years later, when I got to be about 16, 17, to really be able to really appreciate his music.
Well, Shelby J, who sang at the halftime,
Yes.
she was interviewed later with Morse Hayes at Paisley Park, and they were asking about that performance. Was Prince worried when it started raining? And Shelby J says, no, he said, bring it on. So
Yeah.
he was the consummate performer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Prince seemed like he was hyper competitive. Like, hearing you say that, like, as far as when it started raining and he didn't care. Tipper Gore with the PRMC when they were trying to, what is it? Get that bill legislated by Congress.
The warning sticker.
Yeah, the warning sticker. Yeah, it seems like Prince just, he welcomed, challenges and competition.
Yeah. Well, and his views changed as he got older too. I mean, there were things that he intentionally took out of his set list because of the lyric content.
Certainly,
as his beliefs changed, which I think makes a lot of sense. But yeah, that performance was pretty legendary.
Certainly,
we used to take, speaking of Purple Rain. One of the crew guys that I became pretty good friends with, he was the bass tech on the parade tour that we did that summer. He had been on prior tours, including Purple Rain, and he said, every show that, Purple Rain was the encore, Prince would, of course, do the iconic guitar solo, but the question was, how long is the guitar solo going to be?
Yeah.
And that the crew would all line up and take bets on how long the solo would be. I think the longest one was like 22 minutes, so it would be like from 4 minutes to 22 minutes. So, just when he's going and everybody's doing the woo, just keep going and going and going, and just when you think it's over, Prince would launch into another 16 bars.
Certainly, and I even say this because you mentioned his guitar solos. I mean, of course, my favorite Prince memory, because I never ever got a chance to see him perform live because he passed when I was like 16. But my favorite memory of him outside of the Super Bowl was definitely, I seen this video of him, and it was him and other guitar players. I'm sorry, I don't know their names, please forgive me. And you probably know when I tell you. But they were, I think it was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, and somebody
the George Harrison.
Yes. And and they got to playing My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Yeah, that was the George Harrison tribute. And so it was
never seen anything
Tom
like that
Petty,
before.
Jeff Lynne.
Thank you.
I think Joe Bonamassa might have been there. Steve Winwood was playing keyboards. Danny Harrison, George Harrison's son, was playing acoustic. And Prince just tears up this guitar solo that has...
He was falling backwards off stage.
Since been characterized as one of the greatest guitar solos of all time.
Certainly.
Yeah. And I think deservedly so.
Yeah. I never had seen anything like that before. Like I said, I'm watching this through like a computer screen, like, years after it had happened, but never ever seen showmanship like that. Like, that was truly amazing.
Yeah.
Todd, I'm sorry, did you have something?
No, I was just going to say, and how he even launches into that solo with the bending, and the song is My Guitar Gently Weeps. It was just, it was perfect.
Yeah, there's something about that song that, I feel like if you really appreciate great music, it does something to you, like emotionally. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wish I could have asked Tom Petty, because it looks like, and my guess is at some point they had said, Prince, will you take like a 16 or 32 bar solo on this? And then when Tom thinks that he's about done, Prince goes into the next and the next, and just on and on and on, but he builds and builds and builds. I mean, it was an extraordinary solo.
Certainly. Todd, just to, because I want to get back to talking about what you did after your year with, recording Sign of the Times. What was Prince's greatest, what was his greatest talent? Because people talk about him as an arranger, as a keyboard player, as a guitar player. What was, from what you saw with him from that year, what was the greatest thing that Prince can do? Just put him, he was in a league.
I would say the ability to do all of those things. So rather than picking out one of those things and saying that was the most important one, I think that he could do all of those things. Another thing, and this was in that interview with Dwayne and Susan, that Dwayne talks about is his ability while he's working on one song and they come back in and say, can you write another song for Kiss? And he's like, oh yeah, gives it, and then he goes back to what he was doing. The other thing was that just seeing, and this is part of history on work orders or invoices for recording sessions like at Sunset Sound. And that the work order would list one song on it because that's where they started, and whoever at the desk was filling out the work order. But then Prince wrote 3 other songs, and they're not on the work order. So Dwayne talks about, even in doing his research for the book, it was impossible in some cases to determine when that song was started because it might have been the 3rd song and it's not on the work order, so we just don't know. You can go back and look at the tape boxes with that date on it, say, well, it's on that tape. So he had to draw inferences in some cases to say, well, we have no other record of it because it's not on the work order, but it's in that tape box from that session, so it had to be that day. But again, that just goes to, you know, his workflow. He would be, you know, wrapping up one song or even in the middle of one song and get a different idea and just put on another reel of tape. So, I mean, talk about how that mind works.
Certainly.
It's pretty unusual. But to your question, what would, you know, the single greatest talent be? I think that he could do all of that is the talent. Because some people might have all those, but they couldn't do them at the same time, or they, you know, whatever. He did it all.
Todd, you wrap up recording with Prince or working for Prince sometime in 87, 88 after Sign of the Times come out.
Spring of 87.
Spring of 87. After the album came out and it got released to critical acclaim, I mean, some people even argue that it's Prince's best album, even over albums like Purple Rain.
I agree. But I'm biased.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you too. And I'm probably somewhat biased as well because I stand so much by your work and your expertise. But how were you feeling at this time, you know, like after the album came out? Like, what was like your feelings, like working on, I mean, like I said, at that point, Prince was had been artist for about like 10 years professionally. You know, he came back with a follow-up or another great album after Purple Rain. What were your feelings after like all the hard work and everything had ceased for a second?
Well, I was ready for the next step in my professional life. That I thought, even though it was really only a year, that was a pretty jam-packed year. I mean, I think if you added up all the work hours, it was probably, if you're talking about a regular 40-hour work week, it was probably about 2.5 years worth of. So, and the hair was getting grayer. So, I thought it was time for me to move on, and it was certainly a different vibe in Prince world. You know, the revolution was gone. The new band with Sheila was being established for the Sign of the Time tour. So things changed a lot. And I'm not saying good or bad. They were just quite different. But I think for me, I can't say I felt burned out, but I felt that I needed to be in a space in my life where I got to make the decisions for me rather than, you know, and I don't dismiss the year with Prince at all. It was one of the greatest opportunities I ever could have asked for. But it was time, you know, for me. I think I got professional experience of working at that level in the studio. Again, I wasn't the engineer, but being in the studio at that level every day, I felt confident that I could work in a studio vibe. I wanted to get a chance to work on other projects, maybe start some of my own. So at that point, I bought the new Fairlight, which is, you know, the new 16-bit high-resolution sampling. And for me, I mean, literally, Cato, it was the question of, I'm going to take out a loan. Do I want to buy a house or do I want to buy the Fairlight? So I bought the Fairlight and moved to LA.
Wow.
And
started your own production company?
Technically it would have been a production company. It was really just me.
Okay.
And, but to really sell my services, I had put together a pretty large MIDI rig.
So what year was this, Todd?
87. I moved there, I think, of May of 87.
Okay.
You know, rented a condo and built a large MIDI rig and started doing a lot of MIDI sequencing. The early Macintosh computer had just come out, and there was sequencing software for it. Pro Tools hadn't come out yet. There was an early version of what ultimately grew into Pro Tools, but we were still recording primarily to tape at the time. So I didn't have a console and tape machine. I was going to other studios. But I would get hired to do MIDI programming, to do some sequencing, maybe to do sampling. But I had the Fairlight, and there were only a few of them at that point. So if you wanted that stuff on your record, you had to hire me or someone like me. There was a competing instrument called the synclavier that really was a different beast at the time. But those were the two really expensive, cutting-edge workstations. So I got, and mind you, this was still late 80s. There was still money in the record business. It wasn't until 10, 12 years later that things started going a bit south. But so I did a bunch of record gigs because I had the Fairlight. And I did a little bit of film and TV work. But I got the Michael Jackson call because I had the Fairlight. And Bill Bottrell was in the studio at Ocean Way, I think it was Ocean Way at the time, in LA. And he had just come off the success of Sheryl Crow's debut album that was a monster hit. I understand that they had a parting, and he didn't finish making the record. She took it over and finished it with somebody else. But Bill Bottrell was one of the many producers hired to crank out stuff for Michael, which became the Dangerous record. So, you know, Michael came into the studio, and just to kind of contrast how he and Prince worked, you know, where we know Prince could work for days at a time without stopping. Michael could only work in short periods of time, and sometimes those short periods were not even very productive, at least the time that I was there. And so he wouldn't sing for long periods of time. And oftentimes people would stop in the studio to see him, where Prince, you know, closed doors because that would disrupt his work. Michael didn't work that way. So, but it was extraordinary as I was setting up my gear, and there was a mic set up, not recording yet, but just Michael started singing and doing like body percussion. Sorry, I'm probably hitting my mic. Body percussion and dancing and doing his feet thing, and it was amazing. I mean, it was just amazing. And you know, you get it. You just hear a couple words, and it's like, oh God, you knew exactly who it was. You know, but totally different vibe in the studio. In that case, they didn't have any songs done yet. Bill Bottrell was actually writing in the control room to kind of see if he could get ideas going for what would become maybe a song that would end up on the album, and none of it did. So that was a very expensive record. You know, they had like four rooms locked out, and that gets really expensive.
Yeah, I read that Michael Jackson actually has the most expensive record ever made, and it actually wasn't even Dangerous. It was Invincible. Invincible, I believe, if my memory recollects properly, Invincible cost about $30 million to make.
Yeah, I heard even higher numbers on it. So
What did you hear?
I heard 50, but that could have been because of other expenses.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
But they were they were racking up bills.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah. So, but nonetheless, you know, but budgets were still pretty big then. It was shortly after that when the budgets, although it was Michael, he could have asked for whatever he wanted, but those things were through the roof. And at some point, they don't see the money back from those records. That's other ancillary stuff. They didn't have 360 deals yet, but those would, you know, go on your payback list.
Certainly.
You know, so, you know, but he had so much money coming in from his publishing catalog, because it was in the late 80s that he acquired the ATV catalog.
Yes.
Which is a joint venture with Sony.
You got half of it, right?
I don't know what the actual terms were, but I think it was like a 50-50 and Sony did the admin on it, because when Michael died, there was the question of would Sony buy out Michael's share or would the estate buy out the Sony share? And what ultimately happened was, my understanding was that Sony paid $750 million for Michael's share of the publishing catalog. It was a good investment. And that's an interesting one just too on the business side, that it was Paul McCartney and Michael were friends in the 80s, and it was Paul McCartney who taught Michael about the importance and the value of publishing catalogs. And so when Michael acquired that catalog, I don't know what year it was, I think it was 89-ish, it was a lot of the Lennon-McCartney catalog was in that. And Paul McCartney bid on it, but Michael outbid him, and I think it kind of dissolved their friendship as a result. But
things happen.
Yep.
Things happen.
Yes. Shit happens.
Yeah, there you go. Shit happens. Oh, I like that one, Ty. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Well, I know you can edit, so.
Oh, no, Ty, you can leave it in there. I tell people, say how you feel.
So, I don't know the inside deal on that. I did hear a story about the time that Michael acquired the catalog that he, and I haven't verified this, but on the business side, it might have happened, was that they were putting out, Michael was putting out to bid for who would administer that massive catalog, because that was bringing in, I don't know how many millions of dollars a year. And so a publisher or a publishing administrator needs to get the money. That's what the administration side of publishing does. And so they put it out to bid for major publishers, and I don't know what numbers came back, but rumor was that Sony said, we'll administer it for free. Again, don't know if it's true, don't quote me on that. But if you think about it, if you have millions of dollars flowing in and you're on a quarterly pay cycle, that you're sitting on all that money that's getting interest. So you pay out what you have to pay out, but you keep the interest. That Sony said, we'll do it just for the interest. Don't quote me, but there were stories, and you think from a business move that you're making interest on those kind of millions of dollars, that is your administration fee. So anyway, I always thought that was pretty interesting.
No, certainly not. Thank you for that time. Thank you for sharing your experiences with Michael, because I was definitely going to ask, about what it was like working with him as well.
Well, I had a follow-up experience to that when they were going into production, pre-production for the Dangerous Tour.
Okay.
That was the following summer. I think that would have been 92.
Yes.
And so there were two keyboard players. One came out of the Stevie's camp, Brad, and then the guy who got hired as the music director needed a programmer and tech. And I got recommended for that gig. To build the stage rig and to program it and to maintain it on the road. And so I got hired as the music director's keyboard tech. Went through full production rehearsals. So at this point, we're in a soundstage on the Burbank film lot. So you can park a 747 in one of these things. So I don't know how high the ceilings are, 80 feet. So they could construct the full stage, which had hydraulics. The stage went up and down. The whole Thriller set was underneath the stage. They had 5 lighting companies, 2 laser companies, Verilights. It was massive, massive production. So we're building the rigs. They're going through rehearsals, eventually went into full production rehearsals, which is hair, makeup, lights, everything. So I did all of that. I don't remember the dates. But that was a couple of months. And the music director, so the guy I got hired to do his tech stuff for, got fired 2 days before we're going to Europe. So all that production with this keyboard player, music director, all of a sudden, he got fired. So my job went away. Literally, I had already had my plane tickets for 6 months.
Wow.
They give you, for the first leg that was going to be 6 months, that was Europe.
Yeah.
I had all my plane tickets already. And I got paid for the production rehearsals, but I got a call late one night. I think it was like a Saturday night. We were leaving Monday morning to go to Europe. And it was the tour manager saying, you're fired. I'm like, what do you mean I'm fired? I mean, I have a contract.
Yeah.
I actually had a signed contract from Michael's production company. And because they let the music director go and they hired Greg Phillinganes, one of the great keyboard players, I think he was on the Clapton tour at the time, and I think they stole him from Clapton. But he had played with the Michael group. I think on the prior tour it might have been the Bad Tour, I don't recall. So he knew everybody, he knew all the songs. He literally walked in for a rehearsal the very last day before all the gear got packed up to get shipped over. And everybody loved him, great keyboard player. You've seen him, you know who he is, but Greg Phillinganes, amazing player. But he had his own tech. So my job went away. But I did get to witness a couple months of Michael live on stage doing and rehearsals. And it was pretty amazing. And this is a production that, I mean, there are 150, 200 people on the road. You know, and the stage was so big. I had heard that they had 3 separate stages because it was so complex, and the lighting and the sound, everything was so complex back in the day, that Michael's performing on one stage where they're tearing down the stage that he played 3 days ago on, and they're building the stage for next week's show. And they would just leapfrog all over the world with these massive stages, that the production was that big.
Wow.
But I didn't get to go on the tour. But I had the production at that level experience that was fun. I just didn't get to go to Europe. And so that was a lot of money that I didn't get paid. And I actually hired an attorney to see if they would give me a severance because it wasn't my fault. And I had a contract. They broke the contract. Sure. But anyway.
Did you get your severance?
Nope.
Dang.
Basically, Michael's attorney said, sue us. You know, and my attorney, who was a top entertainment attorney that was a friend of a friend, had basically said, you've got a good case, but they will drag it out and it will cost you probably a lot more than you have. And so he said, you got a good case, but it's going to cost you to fight it. And I just said, you know what? The hard part about that, Cato, was I was going to be gone for 6 months. I sublet my condo. I leased out my Fairlight and my MIDI gear, and suddenly I'm staying. Fortunately, the person I sublet my condo to allowed me to stay, and she found another place. But I didn't have my Fairlight for 6 months. Although I was getting at least paid for the rent. But yeah, I was disappointed for a little while. But then I went through a personal development program, a series of courses in LA. And I met my wife in those courses. We're not together anymore, but I think I was not meant to go on the tour for that reason, at least at that time. So, but it was just fascinating to see a major world tour at that level. I mean, the staging was much, much bigger than Prince's at the time. And the whole crew, I mean, the band was bigger, the dancers, the whole thing was a much, much bigger production. And just to get to see that, I mean, it's been surpassed now when you see stuff like the U2 360 tour that up until, Ed Sheeran, it was the biggest tour. Now Ed's been surpassed by Elton and then now by Taylor. Have you seen the staging on Taylor's show?
Not.
Oh, look, just find stuff on YouTube. It's remarkable. I mean, it's the production is beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen the show, but I've seen clips from the show, and it's pretty amazing. But back then, Michael's show was like one of the biggest productions of its time. So it was kind of cool. It was very cool to get to see that at the time.
Yeah, man. Somebody asked me the other day if there was one show I could go to, and I said probably even over Prince is a Michael Jackson show. And I didn't no disrespect to Prince, but I'm not gonna lie, when I be seeing them clips that circulate on the internet every once in a while of Michael standing on stage, what is it, horrendously still, and the whole arena's going crazy, and they got first responders dragging or carrying people out on
fainting.
Fainting
Yeah.
just from his presence, and this man ain't even said nothing or isn't even saying anything, just him standing on that stage.
Well, he built that mystique as an entertainer and did a great job at it. You know, totally different show too. I mean, when Prince would just dance and play funk for 2.5 hours, I mean that was a show. His shows were amazing, but the spectacle of Michael's show was pretty extraordinary. And people sometimes ask me, you know, how important is the spectacle? I said, well, it depends on what your expectation is. You know, you look at the spectacle of Taylor, and I think it is part of the experience. You know, Prince wanted good lights and sound, but for him it was about the music and the groove. That's all that mattered to him. So I said, if you could do that, just give me an acoustic guitar, I'll have the place screaming. And he would. So totally different scenario, but you know, both of them, you know, as good as it gets.
Now, Todd, I want to talk about your career within teaching. But before we get to that, I want to talk about, I believe it was the early 2000s, you worked with another legend who I'm not necessarily too very familiar with, but you know, I'd like for you to talk more about him, Jeff Beck.
One of my heroes, and again, another tragic loss. You know, he had bacterial meningitis, you know, so nothing he did and took him out. But one of the first albums I ever had as a kid, my brother gave me Jeff Beck Truth. And so I don't still have it, but you know, that's a legendary album too. And you look at Jeff's history, there's such a rich history of guitar in those early days. And this is in the 60s, you know, where there was the Yardbirds and what guitar players came out of the Yardbirds, but Clapton, Hendrix, and Jimmy Page. Not Hendrix, sorry. I mean Jeff Beck. Sorry, Hendrix. Edit. So Jimmy Page, of course, goes on to Zeppelin. Clapton and his history is legendary, and Jeff Beck, who ended up going on and doing his own thing. But over the years, Jeff developed a playing style and techniques that nobody else does. And well, again, kudos and respect to all those other great players. And I kind of have to hit pause when people get into these online discussions about who's the greatest guitar player. There are a lot of extraordinary, you know, players. For me, Jeff is at the top of my list just because of what he was able to do, what he did do with the instrument. Took it, and just because of the way he played and styles that he developed that nobody else could do, things that he would get out of the instrument. But if I have to tie my marriage back into this discussion, I was in the middle of a divorce in 2003, and my wife had kind of held my equipment hostage, so I couldn't work. And tied back to the Michael Jackson tour, the guitar player for Michael, who also had done a couple shows with Jeff Beck, she got a call from Jeff's tour manager. Jennifer Batten was her name. Amazing guitar player. You've probably seen videos of her, the spiked up blonde hair, playing the guitar, the solo on Thriller, or on Beat It. Because she knew Jeff's tour manager had called her to see if there was a keyboard tech and programmer in the States that she could recommend, and she remembered me from the Michael tour. And we still had a couple mutual friends. Her tech was a close friend of mine. So I got the Jeff gig, and it was a godsend to me at the time because I was in the middle of a divorce and I had no gear, so it was hard for me to work. And Jeff was always one of my heroes, even though I'm not a guitar player. And so to get out of LA and make a pretty decent salary for 10 weeks being on the road with one of your heroes. It was a real blessing, absolute blessing. And he was delightful. It was the Guitar Shop Trio from 1989, so there are only three. It was Tony Hymas, Terry Bozzio, amazing drummer, and Jeff. So it was a small crew, tight-knit crew. It was a dual headliner, B.B. King and Jeff Beck. So it was, I didn't get to be in the studio with him, which I would, just the sound he gets out of his instrument, I would have loved to have watched him work in the studio, but get to watch him play, almost every night for the summer. So I was crushed when I heard, well, you and I were out in L.A. We were on a bus when word came in that Jeff Beck had passed.
No.
But
you did a great job at holding it together, but I could tell that you were devastated.
I just thought it was tragic. What he had done in his career, what he'd done for the instrument. And, I think my experience of him as a person was that he was just a very gentle and kind soul.
I've heard.
And, I go back and look at interviews with him and him playing and demonstrating his technique and stuff. Pretty mind-blowing. Sure. Really mind-blowing what he did with the instrument. And he made it so effortless. Yeah. One of my favorite sayings was, I think it was Pablo Casals, just legendary musician, that said something about your playing technique on the instrument. The ultimate or perfect technique is one that appears flawless or effortless, but it takes you a lifetime to get there. And watching Jeff play, it's just like, he makes it look so easy. But yeah, you try that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was another real gift. There are a couple other people in the studio that were a lot of fun to work with. There are a handful of people that I didn't get to work with that I would have loved to. Joni Mitchell and David Bowie would probably be two at the top of my list. Although Prince and Joni became really good friends, which really, really surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't, but I think Joni is one of the greats in her field, in the craft of singer-songwriters. So, just quick side note, not to name drop, but okay. We did a show with Prince July 3rd, 1986 in Denver.
Okay.
And I turned around my rig was on the stage right wing of the stage. And I turned around and Joni Mitchell was sitting this far away. Prince had asked her to come up. She flew in to sing backups on Purple Rain on the encore. And so I turn around and there's Joni, one of my almost lifelong heroes. And so yeah, there she was. But and funny side story to that I learned only a year or two ago from Dwayne, who wrote the book, was that Wendy and Lisa, in the Revolution, Wendy and Lisa were tight with Joni and still are apparently, and that Joni kind of hesitantly agreed to sing backups on Purple Rain, but she confessed that she didn't know the lyrics. And right before she was going to go on stage, the story goes, Wendy says to Joni, "It's real easy. The lyrics in the chorus are purple rain, purple rain, purple rain, purple rain, purple rain, purple rain, purple rain. Got it?" I can see Joni. And she killed it. It was just great. So, but anyway, so that was 2003 for Jeff.
Well, Todd, before we get into your illustrious career and decorated career as an educator, a couple things, because I always like to make sure that I got more to say, that we give people bits and pieces that they can carry on with them. And studio engineering is still very much a big what is it? It's very much still a profession, a prevalent profession within the music business. As long as music is made, it's going to need to be recorded. Some of the best advice that I've ever received, and it was from actually a mutual friend of ours, Patrick McDougal, and Patrick told me, the legendary Patrick McDougal. Let me put some respect on his name. Y'all can go Google him. Patrick told me, and I don't mean to put all of his business out there, but he told me that, you know, as a engineer or working within music tech, especially for artists, especially working with artists, he said that it is extremely difficult to, you know, like really take care of yourself. He was like, if you look at all of the top guys, the top engineers from, you know, over the years, a lot of them die really young. He was like, you know, it's hard to get sleep, it's hard to eat, you know, semi-healthy. And he was like, you know, a lot of the top-notch guys just aren't here anymore because this is a very demanding profession. With that being stated, Todd, you're in your 60s. You are extremely healthy. You are still extremely excited about life.
Lose a few.
You look great. You know, you're still extremely healthy. You're still extremely mobile. You're active. You know, you have a sound mind. What has been your key to such beautiful longevity as, you know, you just recently retired?
Well, back to the first part about the demands of a recording engineer. I can break it down a little bit, and there are a lot of variables, but you're right. A lot of it is you get to a certain level and people are coming to you, but there are 100 people right behind you, even at a pretty high level. I've had a couple friends that were very much, you know, coasting at that level, that there's more work that they can handle and they don't want to turn it down. So there's the late nights, 24/7. Yeah, definitely 7 days a week, very stressful. Good money, maybe less than it used to be in the heyday of the record business, you know, from the 80s and up till the late 90s. You know, where mix engineers could make, you know, on a hit record, big record, you know, $5K to mix a song. We don't see that much anymore. You know, those budgets have shrunk. Part of it is the technology has gotten cheaper. A lot of reasons for it. But anyway, what I said about people being right behind you, if you turn work down, you might not get it back.
I think Todd mentioned that. Not Todd, Patrick. I think Patrick
yeah.
mentioned that.
A lot of late nights, late nights. So more so, also to clarify, so we have in the recorded music side, we have the recording and tracking engineer, we have the mix engineer. Often they're the same person. Okay. Often not, depending on the project. And then the mastering engineer. The mastering engineer typically does not have those time pressing demands. Other than maybe a couple really pressing deadlines, they can work 9 to 5. They do their mastering. You know, they don't have to deal with the artist or the producer coming in. They have to take calls or send roughs to the record label. But they can be on the clock, you know, during normal business hours, run their own show. Tracking engineers, probably the worst, because when you have artists, especially temperamental artists that want to record whenever the hell they want to record. So they might come in at 6 o'clock at night and leave at 6 o'clock in the morning, okay? So if you're a recording engineer and you have a family.
Next to impossible.
It's tough. It's tough. You know, you go home from work, take your kids to school, and then you go to sleep. That's tough. That's really tough. I think that's probably the hardest aspect. Mixing, depending on the project, a lot of mix engineers now, especially the ones that are inside the box, have their own rooms, even in their own houses, can pick and choose. You know, certainly there are plenty of cases like, you know, Andrew Sheps, Rob Shirelli,
Great guy. Shout out Rob Shirelli.
Some, and Andrew Sheps is the A-list of the A-list. He works mostly at home and inside the box now. He most likely, then I'm deducing this from some of the things from our more recent conversations over the last couple of years. His wife was British, so after their kids were grown, he lived in LA, had a studio in North Hollywood, moved back to Worcestershire. I think I don't know how far outside of London it is, but he works at home. And he said at COVID, he didn't leave the house for almost 2 years. But he could work pretty much at his own pace and pick and choose the projects. But again, he can do that. To get there, especially if you're doing the tracking and overdubbing side, you're kind of at the mercy of the artist and the label. And it's tough. I had a very, very dear friend who was a mentor to me when I first moved to LA and introduced me to a ton of people. Tavi Mote was his name. Okay. His parents were from Estonia, so it was Tavi, Taavi, Mote, Mote. Just a sweetheart of a person, would give you the shirt off his back. And he was one of the top mix engineers in LA by the time I moved out there. So it was Madonna and U2 who was doing mixes, remixes. And he got to the point where, again, he was an A-list in LA. And his parents were aging, and he had a brother with special needs. And Tavi got really burned out, and he said, I need to take care of my family. He's one of the best mixers in LA. He took time off and could not get back in. It was crushing. Absolutely crushing. That's how competitive it is. And, he did it for his own health and to take care of his family. And so it's tough. Work hard. Surround yourself with good people. Know what you're getting into. That's a tough part of the business, a real tough part. First of all, you're work for hire. And unless you're way up there, you're probably not getting points, and points barely matter these days anyway. So, Rob Shirelli does a great talk on that one, getting paid up front. Pick the people you want to work with good people. If you chase the dollar and you work with assholes, you're going to get screwed, So, but it's a tough business. That's a real tough area of the business. Yes, sir. And when you're freelancing, you're only as good as your last gig. So that's a tough one.
Yes, sir. What's up? As I said before, just hearing your career and still being that you're still here and, like I said, retired and after just such a great career, job well done. If that means anything.
Well, it does. Thank you. One thing, just kind of in that transition. So yeah, I'd been in LA having my own production company and doing sessions and ancillary work until 2004, and I was in the middle of a divorce. As I mentioned, I didn't have any kids, so I could pick up and leave, and I always wanted to teach. In the early 2000s, the record business was in flames. So. I always wanted to teach, and I said, maybe now is a good time to pursue.
Great time. Get that pension, not pension.
So I jumped ship. A lot of this is, I think, really important, especially for people getting into the business. And you and I've talked a lot about this. Yes. Is that network that I developed over 20 plus years, 25 years in the industry, has served me really well going forward in teaching. So whatever you want to do, even if you want to continue on the path that you were on or expand it, broaden the scope, don't burn any bridges. Because that network has served me. Rob Shirelli being such a great example of it, that I met Rob on a session in 1989. And we're tight friends to this day. Yeah.
You lit up when you saw him in LA.
Oh, it was great. We go way back. Because I think what I that session I was on with him was one of the first records he did when he landed in LA. And he lived out of his car for a little while when he was there.
Shout out Ralph.
So no, he's got a great story. I get it.
Super nice guy.
Yeah, we worked on the Callaways album together, and we're still friends with the Callaways.
He did a lot of mixing for one of my favorite producers, DJ/producers, is a man by the name of Battlecat. I think I mentioned him when we were out there, and he did a lot of mixing for him. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Rob went through some interesting transitions. He did some hip hop stuff, and he said some of it actually, and just, not naming any names, but he said some of it got kind of dark, and he said, I don't want to be there, so he got into doing gospel stuff. Yeah. And has won a bunch of Grammys with Kirk Franklin. Yeah.
I think last time I read his website, I think Ross Shirley has spent the 54 weeks at the top of the gospel charts. So his pivot was
I think it was
very successful.
A good move for him. But he did quite a stint with Will Smith and had some success there. Has some great Madonna stories. So, but yeah, delightful guy, and he's managed, to really walk the walk in about you be a good person and you work with good people, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, certainly. Well, Todd, you mentioned your teaching.
Yeah. Not anymore.
Yeah, well, not anymore.
Good timing.
Like I said, you just recently retired. Todd, can you take us through, your teaching career?
Yeah.
Just your experiences. Or I'll wait till you give. I'm sorry, Todd.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. Todd, could you take us through your teaching experiences and, just what what did you taught for about nearly 20 years?
This was year 20.
Yeah, year 20. Talk to us about your teaching career.
Well, I had some guest lectures when I was still in LA. People had asked me to come in to do workshops or whatnot, but I just wanted to do it in more of a formal scenario. And I thought I had two avenues that I could approach in a teaching scenario. One would be audio production, because I felt pretty comfortable in that realm. And the other was the industry side. I wore a lot of hats in the business, and the industry was starting in the early 2000s. First of all, it was crashing and burning, but there was a bit of innovation. We could see it coming, but I could, based on a 20-plus year experience in the industry, I thought I had something I could share with students. So, and then as I mentioned, being in the divorce, the industry tanking, I was ready to leave LA. I had no kids, so it was pretty easy to pack up and leave. And I was ready to leave LA too. It wasn't that I had to stay there.
Man, you say you have no intentions of ever living there again.
No, been there, done that, and I'm glad I did it when I did.
18 years in LA?
Yeah. And so I had a friend that was teaching at the university, Southern Illinois University, which is the bottom of Illinois, kind of where the Ohio and the Mississippi River merge. So it's the bottom of the state. So we're 3 hours to Nashville, 2 hours to St. Louis, in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. Kind of a depressed economically area of the state because all the money's in Chicago. Yeah. All the power's in Chicago.
And then is that by Skokie?
Chicago's near Skokie.
Oh, okay.
Skokie is a northern suburb.
Okay.
Actually pretty close to where I used to work. But no, Carbondale is bottom of the state.
Okay.
And so a friend of mine was teaching there, and he said, an audio position might be opening up here. Are you interested? And I had looked, kept my eye on a couple teaching positions, but at the university level these days, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, that most positions require a PhD. And I see that, and I believe that many positions ought to require a PhD.
Yes, sir.
To teach record production or music industry, how many PhDs are out there that really know that end of the business?
Yeah, because that's something you got to do. Yeah,
Susan Rogers is the only engineer producer I know with a PhD.
And she went and got it later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So would you not hire Susan Rogers?
She had a PhD in psychology.
Neuropsych.
Thank you. Yeah.
And in audio cognition. But you're right, she did that after Purple Rain and after she produced Bare Naked Ladies. So my pet peeve is when I see positions like that advertised, it says PhD required, some industry experience may be considered. I'm saying, well, that's backwards. Really, that's backwards.
Yeah. Like I work with Prince and Michael Jackson.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and Jeff Beck.
So anyway, a position came up, and I only had a bachelor's degree at the time because I got my music degree from IU, but I had no advanced degree. And they needed somebody. So again, I was kind of in the right place at the right time. I was ready to leave, and they were okay with the fact that I only had a bachelor's degree. They looked at my experience and said, okay. So the short version is I spent 13 years teaching audio. I wrote a couple of classes. I wrote a MIDI class. I wrote a producing class, intro and intermediate or advanced studio recording. And then I came up with a couple music industry classes and took over a program for our students in Nashville, where we could take our students to Nashville to hear from industry, pros. And so I did that for 13 years. And then Illinois was crashing and burning. It was very political, not to get political, but the basic issue was there was Illinois is historically Democratic.
Yes.
And for a brief moment, they had a Republican governor, and the Democrat legislature did not work with the governor, and vice versa. I worked at a state university. They didn't have a state budget for 2 years. We had no money. And I was kind of at the bottom of the totem pole anyway. So I loved the gig. I loved working with the students. But the university programs were going away. People were leaving. Enrollment was declining. So I woke up literally February of 2017 and said, Todd doesn't have a backup plan and he better get one. And so I started looking. And actually the first opening I saw was at Syracuse. And the search language for that, what they were looking for, read my resume or CV to a T. You want somebody that's got significant industry experience in these areas, check, check, check. University level teaching experience, 13 years, check, check, check. So I guess they thought it was a good fit because I got hired at Syracuse University in the music school, which is in the College of Visual and Performing Arts.
Big VPA.
So teaching in the industry degree program, which is a Bachelor of Music with a music industry focus. So I was working in that program, small program, but a good one. We were one of the earliest music industry bachelor's degrees that I know of. At least that's what they tell me. And then my immediate colleague retired, so I became the coordinator of that program, and along the way became the co-director of the grad program, which my esteemed colleague over here is a graduate of, the Audio Arts Master's program that's a joint degree between the Newhouse School and VPA. So I've done that for 7 years, so that adds up to 20 years of teaching experience, and I just am of the belief that 20 years of kind of doing the same thing. It's been different. I mean, it hasn't been the same thing every day, but it's been 20 years of teaching. I decided that I'm about to turn 66, that it's time for the next chapter before I get too old to be able to enjoy the next chapter. And you mentioned, people that have left us. I don't want to be one of those, before getting to do, well, what's next? And I'm not sure what that looks like, but I have some things, particularly getting back to writing, playing, and recording. But the teaching has been great, and I've always felt that, I think at the end of the day, the semester, the year, whatever, I learn more from my students probably than they learn from me. So, I love our conversations, and I always learn things from you about, areas that you're delving into that I know nothing about, and and I certainly hope that discussion between us continues.
Definitely.
But no, teaching it's been a blast. Really been a blast. And, I think in both cases that Southern Illinois gave me the opportunity with only a bachelor's degree, and then I got to experience Nashville because I had never worked in Nashville and built a program there, and then come here, and, the students here have been at a very high caliber. My colleagues have been awesome. So, no, I'm just very, very blessed in the opportunities that I've had along the way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Todd, I wanted to ask you something. What has been the greatest lesson that you've learned from your students?
Wow. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that one. Maybe this is overly simplistic, but it's really important, I think, for a teacher, a mentor, whatever, when you're in that kind of coaching role, to say, I don't know, but I know where to find out. So I think that's that's important. That's a good question. I'll have to ponder that one further. But I always wonder what's going on in the minds of my students, especially the older I get. When I started teaching in my 40s, I was about the age of my students' parents.
Yeah.
That was 20 years ago. So now I'm starting to think I'm getting up to be the age of their grandparents. Is there a disconnect? Part of it, I think part of my responsibility is, how do I show up? How do I relate to the student or students? Hopefully, I've done that in good service, but I am starting to feel in the last couple of years a little bit more of that age gap and just an inherent disconnect. The other thing that I think is equally important for me to acknowledge, that the industry that I spent a lot of time in is no longer. And if that's what I'm teaching, I better be really up on what the new industry is. And that's been, I think, one of my biggest challenges in the last couple of years, is reading the trades every single day. Who's doing what? What is the new technology doing? Of course, the buzz for the last year and a half, and will continue, I think, for the next probably 20 years, is going to be AI. And I don't know what that landscape is going to look like. I think part of it is incredibly exciting, and part of it being the intellectual property, interest or nerd that I am. There are some huge issues that need to be addressed, like now, that are on the table. And I think that's really fascinating. I'm going to spend a lot of time in retirement, mulling that over and hopefully doing some consulting on that. But I think all the more that's really a good time for me to say, I'm going to leave all this stuff that's on the table and coming at us at lightning speed. I'm handing that over to the next guy that's going to replace me. So that maybe somebody that's a little more entrenched in what's coming down the pike is going to be able to deliver that to the students.
Certainly. When it comes to IP, because intellectual property, that's what you specialize in. You're brilliant. Yeah, you're one of the first people I think to call, anytime I see something that I either don't understand, or if I have I try to foresee the future sometimes, you are like the first person on my list to call.
Well, that's something that always fascinated me, and I did put time into it. And just back to one of the opportunities I had in teaching at Southern Illinois, is one of the perks of being a faculty person is that you can take courses or work on a degree tuition free. So I took advantage of that. I'm not an attorney, I didn't get a JD, but the law school had created this master's called a Master of Legal Studies.
Yes.
Which was like halfway to a JD. And it was build your own concentration. It was kind of like your master's, where you could focus on the areas highly elective driven, where you could focus on where you wanted to, become an expert in. And so I did that in mostly copyright, as it would pertain to music. And so as a result, I was able to teach a law class in that. My focus was on copyright. And you know, a lot of things have changed over the years as technology changes. The stress it may put on our existing copyright scheme is challenged. And boy, right now we're having the biggest challenge I think that we've ever seen with AI.
Certainly.
And I'm not saying that necessarily from a doom and gloom. We have some challenges that need to be addressed, but the possibilities from it also are really, really exciting.
What are the key challenges with AI, Todd, if you don't mind getting into that?
Jobs going away. So from the copyright perspective, I look at it as between copyright and state law called right of publicity, we have three components. Looking at using an AI platform, so let's say ChatGPT or Claude, that you can train your platform, a language model, to ingest content, and then based on prompts that you give it, have it learn from what it has ingested and generate an output. So what you're inputting might be, I'll just take a hypothetical. I want to generate a song that stylistically, lyrically, melodically is like Harry Styles. And I want the singer to sound like Harry Styles. Okay? So how do you train your model? Okay? You feed it Harry Styles songs. Okay? And then say, you know, I want something along this style lyrically, melodically. So then it outputs a song that is reminiscent of a Harry Styles song. Okay? So a couple issues. Do you have permission, or should they require permission for you to use Harry Styles songs? And remember, we have the two copyrights. We have the composition. So let's say Harry wrote a song. Does Harry, as a songwriter or as a publisher, give you permission to input his song with the intention of generating an output that is like Harry's song? My guess is Harry might have a problem with that.
For sure.
Okay?
Especially with the
so we have
multi-rate
input.
hits.
Do we need permission? Do you need a license to feed that language model? And you might be feeding it 20 songs. And that, you know, from those 20 songs, you might have multiple songwriters and multiple publishers for each song. So you might have 75 rights holders for that one input stage. Okay? Do you need permission from that?
Yes.
Okay. So jury's out on that. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think you're using property with the intention of generating something like the property that you own.
And where is it pulling
You're giving
from?
yourself competition by...
And where is it pulling from is the key thing, too.
Yeah.
Like, is there a database that's coming from this particular company or this particular label? Is there a database that's coming from this particular publisher?
Well, it
You know?
depends what you input. So, but
How can they keep
should
track?
Congress, Europe just passed in March an AI Act that puts pretty strict restrictions on this input stage, where you have to document it, you know, what you used. And then you have the output stage. A couple problems with the output. The Copyright Office in the United States has held the policy that authorship has to be human.
Yes.
So now you have an AI platform, it's a computer, it's software, that's generating this. So while there were some instructions, the platform is what generated this song. Can this song be copyrighted? And so far, for AI-generated content, the Copyright Office has said no. So now nobody owns this song? What about the people whose work was on the input? Do they have any ownership over the output? We don't know. So Congress needs to put up guardrails and answer some of these questions. State laws are being passed. Tennessee last month passed the Elvis Act to protect musicians whose recordings are being used in the input stage of generating newly created AI content. And then we have, so that's the copyright side as far as ownership on the output, licensing and permission on the input, and then for the likeness of an artist. So in my hypothetical, we want it to sound like Harry. Okay, so remember the fake Drake a little over a year ago?
Yes.
That kind of kicked all this off to the music industry, like, uh-oh, the horse is out of the barn. So some guy posted on Spotify a song that was AI generated that sounded like Drake, and it sounded like Drake, and it wasn't Drake. So Drake goes and the labels go, no. Okay,
Yeah.
so that got taken down, and now what's really funny, kind of ironic, that Drake and Kendrick are having this spat, and so Drake put up a track dissing Kendrick that had a sound-alike of Tupac and Snoop. This was last month,
Yes.
2 months ago. And it sounded like Tupac and Snoop.
Sure did.
Tupac's estate sent a cease and desist to Drake. So it was ironic that it started out with fake Drake and he said take it down. And then Drake does.
The same thing.
So this is heavy stuff.
Certainly.
And there's not an easy answer. It's interesting because the rights holders, labels, and publishers are saying, you know, not so fast, you need permission for that, but they're also putting millions and millions of dollars into AI development themselves. Where are they going with it, you know? So we take a look at other possibilities, how this ripple effect might happen. One other thing I wanted to say is the sound-alike for Harry, there's no federal law that says you can't copy Harry's voice. There's state law, but it varies widely from state to state, called right of publicity. You remember the Bette Midler and the Tom Waits cases that we talked about, where there were TV commercials that use sound-alikes?
Yes.
And they sued Tom Waits, Frito-Lay, Bette Midler for Ford Lincoln Mercury, for copying their likeness, having sound-alikes, and it fooled the public. And so they both successfully sued the ad agencies for misappropriating their voice by right of publicity laws, we call it, that you can't misappropriate somebody's characteristics. But it's kind of a patchwork in the United States where New York, Tennessee, and California have the strongest right of publicity.
Of course.
Because of the entertainment business, and Tennessee because of Elvis. And Delaware does not have any right of publicity. So where do you sue? So I think we're going to see a federal right of publicity make it, you know, across the board. You can't steal somebody's likeness. So again, the horse is already out of the barn.
Certainly.
And it's only going to get better. Now we're seeing these models training themselves on prior output from these models. So which is going to speed up the ability of this technology to do it. So you take a look at the last union, the writer's strike, okay? One of the concerns is that scripts are going to be written by, the most recent union, musicians union contracts with film companies, AI, okay? You can't steal our performances for your next movie. Actors Guild, you can't take, you know, our visuals and put me in your next movie when it's not me, okay? It's all there. It's all there. It's pretty scary. New York Times ran a piece 6 months ago about taking a still from an actual movie and then taking prompts into an AI platform, I think it was ChatGPT, to generate a picture that would have likely been a screenshot or a frame from Batman.
Wow.
And they put them side by side, the original one and the AI one, and the average person on the street wouldn't tell them apart. So yes, people should be concerned about that kind of stuff. The Supreme Court, the end of 2023, Chief Justice Roberts had, as part of the end of year SCOTUS report, half of it dealt with AI for law clerks clerking for the Supreme Court, because they found mistakes that were AI-generated briefs. Okay, 2 New York attorneys got sanctioned for submitting briefs for an upcoming case where they miscited a court case. And I think there was some bizarre connection where the judge on the upcoming case was the one that was miscited in the AI brief, and he caught it. So Justice Roberts said, new rules, we're fine with them using AI as a tool to help them research and write the brief. But they have to fact check and they have to acknowledge that they used AI in generating part of the brief. So guardrails.
Certainly.
So that was kind of a long-winded response to your question.
Nah, that was a lot. I just gained a lot of great information. I know our viewers would
when AI first came front and center to the public in the industry, they said, this is the next Napster. This is bigger. This is the industry. And one thing though is, what did the industry learn? What did they do wrong with Napster?
They didn't digitize fast enough.
Well, they tried to shut it down when, fast forward, 15 years after Napster, the same technology that fostered Napster saved the industry, because it's, MP3s that now we're streaming. And the billions of dollars that are now streaming back, no pun intended, into the industry. How do we responsibly use this technology as good actors to make the industry better, but to have the platform generate music that at some point might get good, but we're cutting the songwriter, the artist, the label, the producer, that whole ecosystem because somebody, could do that. We need to be really cautious, but we need to move forward because this ain't going away.
Certainly. Well, Todd, thank you so much for breaking down just the music business and the kind of where people stand on AI, because I think AI is so complicated that a lot of people within the media business or just in general just don't even necessarily even want to kind of even get involved with it. But I appreciate you for so beautifully breaking it down. You definitely just gave me a lot more insight and some more things that I need to look into. But
can I just add one thing to that?
Yes, sir.
There are some people in the industry, including some people that I'm talking to, about putting up certain things. Remember on Spotify, verified artists, the check mark? That idea, there's one I was just talking to an attorney in Nashville about last night, called, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it. But something like, Fairly Trained is the platform.
Okay.
And so anything like a music platform, there are a couple you can check out. Boomi, Sudo, Udio are music-based AI generating platforms, and there are some huge flaws in their models.
Of course.
That's another conversation. But that one of them, Boomi, has this layer called Fairly Trained. And I haven't dug into it, but it appears to be something that says the output has been fairly generated based on the input that was used. I'll get back to you on my understanding of that.
Okay.
Another platform, I just was on a webinar last week. A company over in Switzerland called Casper Labs is working with IBM to do implement for business practices. So this is not music related, but this is for companies that are using AI on the back end. So totally different application, but that people are doing this to make sure that the applications of AI are used in best practices, and they're developing a layer through IBM Watson, it's called.
I've heard about that.
Yeah, to using that technology to kind of keep the train on the tracks.
Certainly.
On the back end of business models. So I thought that was interesting. And dealing with a guy that used to work with the RIAA, he is working with a guy over in Scotland doing a similar thing that they're approaching, my understanding is approaching streaming services to have user-generated content that gets put up on Spotify through TuneCore, DistroKid, whatever, that it's verified that this is not AI generated content. So you'd get the check on a track, you know, so that the consumer, the forward facing side of it, can be, you know, this was not AI generated.
Certainly.
So is that going to stop the AI generated stuff from creeping in?
Certainly not.
Taking royalty streams from people that should be getting it. Again, that might be for another story. But people are looking at these things. They have to. They better be.
Yeah,
so,
certainly, definitely need to be looking into it. And like I said, Todd, thank you so much for beautifully breaking it down. But Todd, really fast, just as we get ready to wrap, Todd, last question I have for you. What is the nicest thing one of your students has ever done for you in 20 years of teaching?
There's a lot. I think one of the things that you know, always makes you look back and say, you know, this is what I was meant to be doing, is years later, somebody writes you a note, you know, hey, I saw you on LinkedIn, or I remember, or something about me comes out and they happen to see it and said, I remember you talking about that in class, you know. Things like that are just always wonderful. Looking, you know, even back to some of my first students when I first started teaching, this is hard for me to really get my head around. You know, they might have been 19 or 20. They're going on 40 now and they have 3 kids and a successful career. I'm like, when did that happen? You know, those 20 years went fast for all of us. But I'm still in touch with a lot of them. And that's a beautiful thing. When somebody gets a new job, a couple of my students recently, one of my top students over the last couple of years, she just graduated and she wants to go to law school. I wrote her a letter for law school and she deserves it. You know, that's a joy to get to do. And I know she's going to do great things, like really serious stuff. I had a student a couple years ago that went through the music industry program as an undergrad. And it was just, you know, one of those small world things that it turns out that a good friend of mine that I knew when I moved to Cambridge in 1983, before I took the music store gig, I rented a house and a woman was in law school at BU and we're still friends. She called me 5 years ago and said, one of my close friends' daughter is coming to Syracuse. And I said, well, what program? She's in the music school. Well, what degree? Music industry. I said, I'm going to have her in class. She just graduated and she brought me this beautiful gift. It was a book on Queen, on the band Queen. And it's like this definitive book on the life of Queen. I said, you didn't have to do that. But anyway, so there are things like that are just kind of these acknowledgments or thank yous that kind of stuff gets me out of bed in the morning, you know, to go do what I do.
Certainly.
When, you know, the light bulb goes on. There was one of my first students, quick story, and then we'll wrap. I had a student when, it was my first or second year teaching, and she was a delightful student, struggled with audio and tech and signal flow through a console, you know. And she really struggled for the first semester, and we spent a lot of time on it, but she was really committed. Great student, really interesting. She wrote this incredible poetry, and she did, she would read it. Her recordings were her spoken word stuff, and incredible stuff. She was like 6'5", African-American. Her name was Shanae. Delightful person, one of my favorites early on. And at the end of the first semester, there was a project where they had to present in class, and there were certain things in the project that they had to accomplish. Like, you have 6 tracks of background vocals. How do you get those 6 tracks into a single reverb? Well, you put the reverb on an aux and you bus those 6 tracks. You don't put 6 reverbs on it. And early in the semester, this kind of language just, you know, her eyes kind of went blank. But at the end of the semester, she was presenting her project, and it was really good. And I remember just saying, so Shanae, how did you get those 6 tracks of background vocals over to a single stereo reverb? And she said, well, I created an aux channel over here on 2728. I put a stereo reverb on the insert there, panned 2728 left, right. I took bus 1 and 2 for these 6 channels, odd, even, and bussed over to 1 and 2, which were the inputs of this aux channel. And I put the reverb on 100% wet. And then the amount I was sending over there was from the buses that I was sending to it. That's the amount. And then my reverb aux was that stereo pair. I wanted more reverb, I just bring up that pair. I'm like, shit, when did you learn that? And I likened that. I loved it because she was fluent. Like overnight, she became fluent. And I liken it to when you're learning a foreign language. When you first start learning a language, you translate it into your native tongue, right? So there's a middle step that's, okay, here's the English word, the French word, and then if it's a verb I have to conjugate it, is this. And fluency occurs when that step comes out. That step came out for her, you know, where she go, this is how I did it, right? So that was one of those things where I just kind of walked out of school and just, she got it. So yeah, that was, I remember that.
Certainly. Well, Todd, real quick on the show, we have a special segment that I'm going to present to you, but hopefully that this it gets included into the nicest thing a student has done for you. You're going to have to give me 1 second. I got to grab it. Oh, let me find it. Oh. So Todd, here on I Got More to Say. What we like to do is we like to give people who have positively impacted the lives of, we like to give people who have positively impacted the lives of, in your case, thousands, millions of people. You know what I'm saying? We like to give them what I like to call their quote unquote flowers. And essentially, I present these flowers to you for a few reasons. The number one reason is that going to Syracuse absolutely changed the trajectory of my life. It helped me realize my potential. It gave me a very solid network, and it gave me, it helped me trust people again, such as yourself, such as Patrick McDougal, such as Bill Wordy, countless names that I can keep on, continue to go on and on for. But yeah, Ty, I really appreciate all of the things that you have done for me, from the encouragement, you know, just from overall just having my back, being somebody who, you know, helped guide me through, you know, which really was a very fruitful and a very positive time in my life. So anyways, Ty, I don't want to be too long-winded, but I went to Galea's here in Rochester, New York. Free promo for them, and I went together and I had to make you this arrangement, Todd. So once again, these flowers are for you, really helping benefit my life. I don't know what you saw in me when I applied at VPA a couple years ago, but I remember you telling me, it was like, hey, Cato, you know, I usually have the biggest say overall who gets in, and I think it'd be in your best interest to apply, and it was probably the best decision I made. So Todd, on behalf of not only just myself, but like I said, millions of people that you have positively impacted, Todd, I present these flowers to you.
Well, thank you, Cato. I'm very moved. So I want to, can I set it down?
Yes, you can.
I just want to give you a hug and say thank you.
No problem at all.
Love you, buddy.
Yes, sir. I love you right back, Todd.
Thank you, sir.
No problem at all, Todd. These are for you. I had to, because as I said before, you know, I think in life sometimes we wait far too long to show people the appreciation and the recognition that they deserve. And I know that this is on behalf of especially students, on behalf of thousands of students. So yeah, Todd, these are definitely for you, and I hope that you enjoy them.
I will. Thank you.
No problem
Thank
at
you.
all.
I'm very touched.
But Todd, as we wrap, anything that you want to look into this camera, anything that you want to promote, anything that you want to say, you know, as we move on?
Well, I just want to thank you for this time together for a couple of reasons. One is that we get to talk about stuff that we're both interested in. I'm glad that you're doing this program, and that we just get to spend extra time together. My only request of you is that we stay in touch.
Oh man, Ty, you got that all day. I'm about to be calling you monthly.
And go out there and you know, do your best Cato every day.
Nah, yes sir. Yes, sir. Definitely. I'll be sure to. Well, Ty, if that's all you got, this is Todd Herreman. I'm Timothy Cato III, and as always, I got more to say.